Muted.
And it's 9:30 a.m. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me, Stephen Boulden, at 12-3 Marketing for another weekly ACT training video on our free Tuesday morning webinars. I hope everybody had a wonderful 4th of July weekend. I know that I did. My fiance and our 2 dogs went out to the Adirondack State Park in New York and conquered a few more of the 46 high peaks. I got another 4 of them off of our list on a long journey. I was seeing a lot of different photos shared over the weekend, everyone having good barbecues, cookouts, and family fun. So I hope everyone's back at work and ready to be refreshed. Today, we're going to be covering ACT for administrators. I want to talk about 3 things primarily today. That's going to be ACT backups, managing users, and also doing various maintenance tasks and setting of preferences within the database. And I want to get started right away with the ACT backups. As always, I'm presenting out of the ACT 2016 demo database. This database comes pre-installed with every installation of ACT. You'll often find it within your ACT databases folder. It's free to really experiment if you want to take any of the lessons you learn in these meetings and go kind of wreak havoc upon a database without hurting your production database at all. So what we want to do is talk about ACT backups, and very important that we do so. The reason is ACT backups do not work the same way as traditionally backed up files, and I'll explain what I mean by that a little bit. If you look in your computer's My Documents folder, and then under ACT, ACT Data, and Databases, you'll find your ACT database files stored in here. And now this might be a network location. For those of you that have a company server, this will be on your server's Documents ACT Data folder is where you'll find the database files. For those of you that have ACT installed locally on your own computer, then it will be in your own personal documents. People think that often it's a common and honest misunderstanding that because the database files are here within their Documents folder, they'll have whole disk backups going on. They use a lot of different backup utilities, Acronis, backup schedulers, Carbonite, things of that nature, that will copy all the files on the disk to an offsite backup, and they think they're set. And unfortunately and tragically, that is not the case. There is more than meets the eye going on here. Because even though all of your ACT, some of the required files are stored within your Documents folder, ACT is what's called a SQL database. And there's a service for SQL Server running on your computer, and Microsoft SQL Server is where all of the core ACT data is really stored within. So we need to make a SQL backup in order for these backups to be able to be transferred, restored, and if something goes wrong, be able to recover your database. There's a simple way with an ACT to make a backup of the database. If you're looking here within any ACT screen, you can go to File, Backup, Database. This is if you want to make a manual one-time backup, and I encourage everybody does this periodically, and we're going to move into the automated backup soon. But when I say backup database, a panel comes up and it gives me some options. Where do I want to send this backup file to? The default location is usually pretty good. It will put it into my Documents folder, /ACT/ACT data/backup. The default location for ACT backups, I recommend you keep it there just because it's easiest for us to find it. If you ever call 12-3 and ask for us to help you out, that's the place that we're always going to look first for a backup file. And you'll see that it's going to give the backup file the same name as the database, ACT 2016 demo.zip. And this is the important part. When it makes a backup file, a true ACT backup packages everything into a .zip folder, and it includes everything you need to restore the database. That includes all of the SQL data, the tables and rows, as well as all attachments, all contacts. It's a pure 100% backup if you have this zip file. I always check Include Attachments, and I never say Password Protect File. That is an option if you have very sensitive data. I find that sometimes people put a password on there and then they don't remember it. If you do Password Protect File, you will need the password to ever restore or unzip that backup. It becomes encrypted. I usually advise against password protecting it just for convenience sake. So if we say include attachments and have this do a manual backup and press OK, normally it goes very quickly unless you have a very large database size. Database size is normally dictated by attachments. If you have a lot of attachments in your database, that's the thing that will grow it fastest. It's not usually contact records. You could have 100,000 contact records that back up lightning fast compared to a database with only a few hundred. If they have 4 gigabytes worth of attachments and documents attached in there, then it can take a much longer time. But if it's a success, we find the backup completed successfully message. If I press OK and go back into my Act Data folder in my documents, backup, here is our zip file. Now this zip file will be automatically picked up by whatever server backup program you're running. This zip file can be copied and pasted and duplicated. You can move it onto flash drive. You can send it through any file transfer software that you have to a different location. You can sprinkle it around into all sorts of off-site backups wherever you choose, and it's a very good idea to keep your backup in multiple places. It's also worth mentioning that this backup is a snapshot of the database at this point in time. So if a few days go by and you're changing around data in the database, editing some of the information, changing records, something goes haywire and you need to restore from a backup, you're only going to be able to restore from the most recent backup that you have, which you would lose a few days of data. So it's a good idea to back up often. Now we don't want to have to be tasked with manually backing up all the time by going to File Backup here every morning. And so here we have a tool built into Act called the Act Scheduler. For those of you taking notes, you'll find this under Tools, Act Scheduler. Now the Act Scheduler is an automated backup and maintenance tool built right into Act, and I advise that it's always run on the server. You do not need to run this from every individual client workstation, and I really don't advise that you run it from every workstation because it is running in the background. It might slow down the employee's work if they're busy working on something at the moment and the computer is dedicating resources to doing an Act backup, but it certainly doesn't hurt. There are no conflicts involved with having multiple Act backups running, but you should have these running on the server. We have a question here. I sync with Act Cloud daily. I make a portable backup once a week. Does that make me bulletproof? It makes you bulletproof up to 1 week of data, but yes, that would put you in very good hands, Ernie. If something were to go absolutely haywire and you lost your Act Cloud account, but you still had one of those Act backup files, you'd be able to restore and get everything back up to as of 1 week ago. Or hopefully if the backup had just happened yesterday, then you'd be in good hands up until that point. So the Act Scheduler, when I open this up here, oops, I clicked away from it. When I open this up here, it shows create, edit, or delete a task. And I currently have no database backup tasks running. So if I want automated backups to be running, I'm going to start with create a task here in the left sidebar panel. And for the record, if you go into this Act Scheduler and you do see a few 2 lines for your database written in here, then you should be good and these database backups are already running. I'll show you where we can verify that they are running, but you may not need to do this. But if it's blank, then you're going to go to create a task. It's going to first say select a database, and this wizard will walk us through getting this set up. So we first start by finding our database file. I'll press browse. It opens by default the Act database file location. Your Act database, the file you're looking for is a .pad file, P-A-D. I believe it stands for pointer to an Act database. There's a lot of different files that control where your Act database is. They reside in a few different locations, but kind of the master file that you're looking for whenever you're opening or signing into a database, sharing a database, or backing up a database is this .pad file. So we're going to choose our .pad here, the Act 2016 demo, and I'll press open. So it fills in the file name and location for me. Then you enter the Act username and the Act password of an Act administrator. You definitely need to be logging in as an administrator here to run these backups. Enter in the username and password. For the demo database, the username is Chris Huffman, and she has no password. We'll press next. It checks the validation to make sure that your login was correct. And so then we're going to go to select a task, and we will choose database backup. Press next. It will ask, where do you want to send these zip files to? Remember, this is going to automatically make these zip files for us on a schedule that we will choose. I'm going to leave this to the default ACT backup folder location. If you have a network drive or somewhere else that you'd like to back up to, you can choose that instead. I always include attachments. I don't password protect the file. And I'll press next. And then it will ask, how many recent backup files do you want to keep? And this is very useful because if this thing is running every single day, you don't want 200 days to go by and then you fill up your disk space with way too many backup files. The ACT scheduler will automatically delete the oldest backup file as it creates the new one. By default, they have it set to keep the last 5. That's a good number. I usually end up putting it more around 15. The reason being that sometimes you don't want to keep just one, or if somebody were to, accidentally delete a few hundred contacts, and then you could be able to restore that from a recent backup, but then maybe if 2 or 3 days go by, this ACT scheduler is backing up the more recent versions and deleting the old one. Well, now the more recent backup may be the database that's already too late. It has the contacts deleted in it. And so you want to make sure that you have enough backup files going back a little bit in time so that you can restore to the point before something bad happened. I think 15 is usually pretty good, a good balance between saving your disk space and having more backups available. If you have a lot of disk space, then go ahead and make this as high as you'd like. So I'll say keep the last 15 backup files and say next. And then how often do we want these backups to run? I always recommend daily, personal thing, but you can have it go hourly, weekly, monthly. I'm going to say have it run daily, every single day, beginning today, at what time. If this were running on your server, which is supposedly never powered down, I like to have them run overnight. And so 9:40 p.m. sounds like a good time. We'll have this database backup every day at 9:40 p.m. I'll press next. At this point, we can press finish and we'll be done. But optionally, you can put in an email address here for notifications about the backup. If you put an email address in here, then the ACT scheduler is going to email that email address every single time a backup task happens, usually with a success message saying backup completed successfully overnight. It's sometimes a good idea to set this up. If you wanted to put in your own email address in there, maybe you could create a filter in Outlook to automatically just hide or delete the successful messages, and then only the ones that say failure might come through to your inbox and let you know that the ACT backup scheduler has encountered some type of problem that would require looking into. But you can optionally put an email address in here to get notifications about the backups. I'm going to leave this blank for now. I'll assume that they're working and we'll spot check it over time. And I'll say finish. So under our ACT scheduler window, we now have the backup task is set to be running every day, starting today at 9:40 p.m. When these backups happen, the files are going to go right into your backup folder. They'll look the same as this, ACT 2016 demo, and then a string of unique characters is appended on the end. That's just so that ACT can track, when we said the last 15 backup files, it uses those strings of unique characters, random letters that get thrown onto the end to track which ones they are, and just to make sure that they have a unique file name so that it doesn't overwrite the old ones. But if you do have automated backups running, then it's a good idea to go onto your server and look in the backup folder and just look at the date modified column and check out that they are running recently and actively. This would be good to follow up maybe tomorrow or in a few days to see that this automated sync has worked. So then we're also going to want to create a task for maintenance. Now, database maintenance is a good thing to run if you think about your database kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. I think helps people visualize it better, with all the contact records being different rows within the sheet. Over time, if you're adding new contacts, they get tacked on to the bottom rows. And then if you're deleting and changing things around, then you get blank rows mixed in there. What you want to do is over time is delete the rows out and condense everything up. You want to keep your ACTS database file size small. You want to run an integrity check so that it can find errors early on. And the ACTS scheduler can do an automatic compression and maintenance on your database for you every week. So going into the ACTS scheduler, we're going to follow the same steps for create a task. Again, we're going to choose our pad file, enter the login. Now when I look in my database tasks menu, I have database maintenance here. The option for database backup is missing now because I already have backup set to be running on this database file. But I'm going to choose database maintenance. It will ask, do you want to do an integrity check and a reindex? We want to do both. It does describe what they do here. Integrity check will check your database for errors and repairs any that are found. The reindex will reorganize the database storage area to increase access and speed. Good idea to run both. This one I usually set to run weekly. You're not going to get huge benefits by running this daily. Even weekly is going to be marginal. For those of you that maybe have never run database maintenance, I've seen databases get reduced in size by 70%. You can get huge savings if it's your first time doing this. But I always set this one to weekly. I think is a good amount to run. Again, since servers are off and on, I like to have this go outside of operating hours. So I'll have this run every week on Saturday at, I don't know, we'll just pick 2:46 a.m. I just like to choose a time that people are out of the office. It doesn't slow down the server very much to have this running. Nonetheless, it's best if it doesn't at all. So we'll just pick next here and say finish. And now our ACT 2016 demo database has backup and maintenance running. For those of you that have multiple database files on your computer, you have to set up these tasks each time for each one. So if your server did have multiple company database files on it, it's not common that people set that up, but if they do, then you need to go and create a task for each database. And we're all set here. The ACT scheduler is going to be running this. We can close this out. The ACT scheduler runs as a separate Windows service. It's down here in your task tray, kind of this, I don't know, it looks like a globe or a clock to me. It's this golden clock icon, and it says the ACT scheduler is running. That should be set to start up with your computer. It's always running automatically, and now you can mostly forget about it. Good idea to spot check it every once in a while. Maybe if you ever want to check on your server that the ACT scheduler is still running and still has the tasks in there. I see a lot of ACT errors all the time where certain things get knocked out. Fortunately, the ACT scheduler does not seem to fall under that umbrella. This one is mostly pretty reliable. I don't see any errors with that one. But if we go into your ACT backup folder, it's a good idea to check that those are running. So like I said, that was the most important thing that we'll be covering today. A backup file is something that takes a bit of work to set up now, but you will be thanking yourself with high praises in the future when it comes time to need it. No one's ever really hurt by having too many backup files around, so make sure that you have them. Moving on, I want to talk about ACT users within the database. ACT is licensed on a per user basis, not per computer. So if you only had a one-user license of ACT, you could actually install ACT and use that license key on many computers, but the only limiting factor is how many active users you have in the ACT database. A user is a person with their own unique username and password to log in with ACT. If we go into Tools and Manage Users, this is only available to administrators to be able to see this panel. We can see all of the users of the database. They are all labeled as either active or inactive. In this demo database, it looks like all of these other folks here are all inactive, and they only have Chris Huffman as the active user. Your active user count is only debited based on how many active users you have. So if you have a 5-user license, and if you have to deactivate one user because an employee is turned over, for example, you can go into ACT, deactivate their user accounts, and that will free up another license for you to use and add somebody else into the system. When we go into the Manage Users panel, you can edit any user's security roles by highlighting their username. I'll highlight Allison here. Click Edit User Information, and you can change her security level within ACT. There are 5 security roles within ACT. They are Browse, Restricted, Standard, Manager, and Administrator. Browse users are the most limited of all. They are free in ACT Premium that you can add unlimited, free, read-only browse users. A browse user is only able to view data in the database. They are completely on lockdown from editing virtually anything. They can't schedule an appointment. They can't add a contact. They cannot modify a contact. They cannot record a history. They're on total lockdown. But they can open the database, and they can do lookups, and they can view the contact list if they need access to a phone number or to view somebody else's schedule. I often find that browse users are a good option for people that maybe have only bought ACT licenses for their sales team, but when they find out that they can have free, unlimited browse users, they say, well, why don't we just go ahead and get everybody else in the company their own user license to at least be able to log in and view the data. You can certainly do that with a browse user. A restricted user is a step above a browse user. They're able to add contacts and they can add data to the database, but they have a very hard time editing anything and they cannot delete anything. A restricted user is basically add only to the database in terms of creating contacts. They can put in new histories, they can schedule activities, they can't delete anything. A standard user is generally where most people should fall. It kind of depends on your organizational structure. If you have a very small company and you want everybody to have full access, to even be able to do things like manage other users, you can put them as a manager, but for the most part, I recommend standard users. A standard user has pretty much full reins over ACT, but they can't mess anything up. They cannot define fields and add fields to the database. They cannot customize the database. They cannot add or delete users themselves, but the standard user can add and remove contacts. They can add and delete things off the calendar. They kind of have full access to ACT, but without the ability to ruin anything. A manager is very close to an administrator. An administrator is, of course, complete control on anything. A manager also has nearly 100% control. They're more like 99% control. The manager can do everything an administrator can do, with the exception of add and remove other people as administrators. They also cannot do what's called a schema update on the database. That happens if you upgrade your ACT version, you know, like a full version upgrade from 16 to 17 to 18. Managers cannot implement that. But for the most part, managers can also control users. They can edit fields. They can customize the database. They are just a hair below administrators. And then administrators have full authority over the database. Be very careful when you make anybody an administrator. If they were very malicious, once they are an administrator, they could go into the manage users and then deactivate the original administrator. They could actually kick you out and do a hostile takeover. Not that they would, but it's something to consider if you're going to give somebody admin rights to the database. For the most part, most users fall under standard. Within the Manage Users panel, you can also reset somebody's password. If I press this, it blanks out their password, and I can just save this by pressing Finish, and they'll have a blank password. Or I can set the password for them from here. There are some options. User must change the password at next logon. If maybe you have an internal policy where nobody is allowed to know anybody else's password, you could blank out their password or set this for them and then force them to select a new one once they log in. Or we can disable that. You can prevent the user from ever changing their own password. I usually set password never expires. You can set the password to expire after a certain number of days, that the person has to change their password after a given time period. That's really just a pain in the neck. Unless you have very sensitive HIPAA or financial data within ACT and it's part of your compliance standards, I usually say password never expires. I can click next here. This will just confirm that Allison's user record is active or inactive. Remember that if they're inactive, they will not be able to log into the database. If they're inactive, that will free up the user license for you. If they're inactive, they are more or less completely locked out. And I want to talk about how this is the better option than deleting a user. If you ever have an employee leave your company, I advise that you inactivate their ACT user license and not to delete it. The reason being that everything a user does in ACT, every contact they've added, every note, every history, every activity they have scheduled, that is all associated with their user profile. And if you delete that profile altogether, you want it removed from the system, then ACT still has all these leftover notes and histories, and they want to assign that to another user. If you delete Allison, all of the history she's had in the database, ACT is going to ask you, well, we got to put somebody else's name here to associate this history record with, and they'll have you, dump it all onto somebody else. And that's not accurate. If you have an old employee who leaves the company and you want to delete their data and dump it onto somebody else, now you've got data that's not accurate. Your database will be filled with histories and notes that did not happen with the user that it says it did. If you leave it inactive, your data is kept accurate as it happened, but the user is locked out. So I recommend that you inactivate users if they leave the company. Or you can just activate them if you're adding somebody new. Well, yeah, adding somebody new is under Create New User. I'll show that one too. It's very similar to this. You can toggle them as active. If I press Next, it shows some of the permissions that you can choose that they have. For example, you can manually make it so that they cannot delete records by moving this permission away, or I can restrict their ability to export to Excel and pull that away, or I can give them full permissions and move all of these over. Every one of these does something different. I'm not going to cover them all right now for time's sake. The important ones are export to Excel and deleting records. Those are the important ones. In regards to exporting to Excel, people often want to disable that because they don't want anybody taking a copy of the database and running away. It's very noble, and I think it's a good idea, if that's a concern of yours, that you do your best to restrict them from doing that. Disabling the export to Excel is a step in the right direction. Unfortunately, in this world, though, people that are bent on stealing the database may be able to maliciously. There's nothing to stop them. If they can't export to Excel, maybe they can just look at the database and take screenshots of it. Maybe they could have a pen and paper and write everything down by hand. Point is, thieves are going to thief. So you can take away their export to Excel to make it harder on them. But there's really no foolproof way to prevent it all. So sometimes that really just causes too many restrictions on an employee that makes it harder for them to do their job legitimately. Moving on, so we give them permissions. We'll say Next. We can add the user to a team here. I'll come back to Teams if time permits at the end. Teams are a feature of ACT Premium. They let you bulk add. A user can be a member of a team, and then each contact, you can set its access to say this contact is only visible by members of these teams, and you can select which ones. So maybe you have a team for New York State, a team for Pennsylvania, and a team for Vermont. And then you can assign each contact to be a member of the New York team or Pennsylvania territory or Vermont. And then the users can, the administrators could see everything, but the individual salespeople might be locked up by territory that way using Teams. I will come back to this if time permits here at the end. I say Finish. An alert tells me you may be required to update your password for third-party applications. We can just press OK. What this is saying is, remember in the Act Scheduler how we had to enter the username and password for an Act administrator. This is just an alert trying to remind you, if you changed somebody from being an administrator or changed passwords that the Act Scheduler was relying on, or third-party applications like handheld contact or other add-ons, you might need to go in and update those passwords now. But I'll just press OK. It brings up the scheduler for me in case I wanted to do that. I'll just close that out. And we're all set back here into the Act Manage Users panel. Allison is now active pending. This means that she is an active user, but she's never logged into the database yet. We can see that Chris Huffman, the user that I'm logged in as now, last logged in this morning at 9:20 a.m. Sometimes it's a good idea as an Act administrator to go into your Manage Users tab. You can sort by last logon and see who hasn't logged into your database in several months. There's always somebody at every company who has not logged into ACT within the past 6 months. I usually have the administrators say, go talk to this person or reevaluate whether or not they really need to be using an ACT license. Let's see, some questions here that came in. Making them inactive won't limit the number of licenses. The only ones that count are the active ones. That is correct, Jess. The only ones that count are the active ones. Here in this bottom panel, it says you have enough licenses for X additional active users. In my case here, it's 4. Only the active users count. Once they're inactive, you've freed up that license, and it's ready to be turned over to somebody else. There's also a handy checkbox here for hiding inactive users from different lists that appear in ACT. I always turn this on. This was added in version 17. I can't imagine why it was not added 10 years prior, because it seems like a simple thing, but I'm very glad that they did add it. At different menus and places in ACT, when you're viewing calendars or selecting by users, the inactive users might still appear in the list. So this box will hide them to only show active users when you're using ACT. To create a new user within ACT, we can use the Create New User button. We can create a user from an existing contact, or we can create them right from here. I usually prefer to create a user from contact. I close out of my Manage Users panel. I go into the database. I create a new contact record, fill out the new employee's information. Then I go into Manage Users, Create New, from Contact, and then I can select them out of the database. You can do it either way. I seem to think that this one works better for me. It just helps me to be able to fill out their information more completely at the start. You can do it either way. I'll make Joe Bag of Donuts here a user, a demo contact that I added a few weeks ago. So I select his record. The username by default is usually the contact's full name with a space. Username is case insensitive. Normally does not matter if you capitalize the names or the letters or not, but default is usually the full name. You can customize this if you want. Security role standard, give him a password. He doesn't need a password. ACT users do not need one. It could be blank. If you're using the ACT for Web feature, where you can log on by going to an IP address directly from your phone and log right into the server, then I highly recommend that you have a password so that URL or address got out of control and somebody else had access to it, they could get in. So I recommend passwords if you're using that feature. If you're not using that feature and you don't have anything sensitive in ACT, maybe you want to keep your password blank just so that it's easiest on you. The same way, we can go through, give Joe Bag of Donuts, he's active, permissions, yes, team, we'll ignore, and we'll finish up. This is telling me that we must share the database in order to allow him to access it. For those of you that already have your database on a server, it's already going to be shared. If this is the first time you're adding a second user to the database and you've only ever had one in the past, then you should say yes here. I'm going to say no because I'm actually webcasting from my personal computer at the moment, so or my work computer, and I'm going to say no to that sharing. So now Joe Bag of Donuts is here as an active and pending user. Okay. So moving on, I believe, no, I'll pause here if there's any questions here. Unmute the mics. Anybody on the floor have anything to add about managing users or backups before we go on? All right. And the last thing we're going to do is talk about the latest updates to the version of ACT. You can find out what version of ACT you're on by going to Help, About ACT. Now I'm very hesitant to press this button on this webcast because this session is being recorded and I'm going to put it on YouTube, and my license key for our ACT database would then be exposed. But if you go to Help About ACT, and if any of you are following along, I encourage you to go ahead and fire up this button. A panel will appear that will show you your current ACT version number. It will say ACT Premium version, for example, 17.2.503 or something to that extent. It would say, or ACT Pro, or would have your appropriate edition written on top. The bottom half of this panel will say your license key and how many users you have for the database. Again, I would love to be able to show this one to you, but I don't want to expose my license key out. If you're looking at your ACT version number, though, on top, it's only the first two numbers that are important. The latest version is 18.1. If you see that you are on version 18.1, then you are on the latest edition of ACT. The trailing numbers that come after are not nearly as important, and I tell people to disregard those for the most part. There are two types of updates released for ACT, or three, I suppose. The first are full version updates. That's when you move from something like version 16 to 17 to 18. These version changes require usually a payment. You pay for an upgrade and new licenses. They are full edition upgrades and will bring in major feature overhauls and program restructuring. They don't change up the way that the program looks too much, but they do make the biggest changes between version updates. The second kind of ACT updates are service packs. Service packs are the secondary number that we see in your ACT version. That's like the difference between 18.0 and 18.1. A service pack update is that 0.1 difference. Service packs usually bring with them some new features. For example, the e-marketing panel that was added here in the sidebar was added as an update between ACT version 16.2 and 16.3. The e-marketing panel came in. All service pack updates are cumulative, so if you apply 16.3 and you were previously on 16.0, you are getting all of the features that were included in the previous service packs. It's the same thing between version updates. If you upgrade from 16 to 18, you're getting everything that happened in between. And when you download a service pack update, then it does a large-scale schema update to the database. But first, I want to show you how we can check for them. There is a tool in ACT under Help. Oh, maybe they removed it. I was going to say that's not very good. It does say check for updates. It was something that they had added in 17.0, but I was going to show how it doesn't usually always give you an accurate result. And it looks like they have deleted it. In order to check for ACT updates, the best way to do it is to find out your ACT version. For example, I'm on ACT 18.0. I open up an internet browser, and then I periodically just check ACT Premium 18.0, I'm going to say 18, product downloads. You might want to save this search query. ACT, then your version, Pro, your number, 18 or 17 or 16, product downloads. And what you want to look for on ACT.com is the downloads page. This is the result I'm looking for, ACT Premium and Web V18 product downloads. And it will show you right on top, organized by date, the latest version for ACT. I know a lot of people are probably wondering right now, why does ACT not send out an email or an alert that these are released? Some people want to say, why do I have to manually search for this? I'm sorry, but they just don't notify people, and for good reason. Because when you download these service pack updates, they can be major updates to the whole system. If you want to update from 18.0 to 18.1, you need everybody at the company to download this update file and run it on every computer that ACT is installed on. So you usually need to have a lot of coordination here. Wait until everybody's on site. Wait until you can have access to everyone's computer. The update file is very easy to run. It's a matter of downloading this .exe and then running it on their computer. And then you just let the wizard update ACT. Usually only takes a few minutes, maybe as long as 10 minutes at most, and you're good to go. But it requires some coordination there. The reason that ACT does not send out alerts that there's a new update available is because you do not want a random user at your company to hear word that there's an update for ACT, download the file, and then force everybody else to have to upgrade then. It could be a little chaotic. So it should be something the administrator should act on periodically. I can tell you offhand, the latest updates for ACT for 18 is currently 18.1. 18.2 will be coming out in about another month or two. I will try to send you guys an email, an alert about that when that happens. The latest version of 17 was 17.2. After 17.2, the next update they released was 18.0. The latest update for 16 was 16.3. Going back before that to 2013, I'm kind of rattling my memory here, but I think that was 2013 Service Pack 2 was the latest one we went to there. Let's see. I'm reading through an email that Ernie has pasted into the chat here. Looks like you gave me the body of an email, Ernie, about Keystroke, one of our competitors that had a merger. Donna, you asked for the latest update for 2012. I would strongly recommend that you just update to a newer version, but if we do ACT Pro 2012 product downloads, we find the result here, and the latest update to that was Service Pack 1 Hotfix 7. You can find it sorted by date here. This was the latest update ever released for this version. It's also worth mentioning that these service packs and hotfixes are free updates. You do not need to pay for any type of new licenses to update between 18.0 or 18.1. You need to pay or get a subscription plan that includes free updates when you do the full major version updates. So I mentioned there were three types of updates. There was the full version updates, there's the service packs, and then there's hotfixes. They've renamed hotfixes and just called them updates in the newer one. I generally ignore the hotfixes. Those are minor updates that will fix some small glitch or bug. They do not have to be installed on every computer at once. Some of these hotfixes that they install are very minor, and you can look at the patch notes if you're very interested in what they cover. I normally just advise that people wait until the next service pack comes out. The service packs like 18.2, which will be coming out in a few weeks, is going to be cumulative and include all of the hotfixes that were there before it. If you really just pay attention to what the latest updates are for your version, then you'll have everything else that's included there. I also want to mention, I'm looking here at ACT 2012 Service Pack 1. Technically, every ACT version has a 3-year useful life that they agree that they would support for 3 years. In practice, and in my 6 years of experience now working with ACT, as soon as a newer version of ACT comes out, SwiftPage stops caring about the older ones. that might be a little harsh on them, but like once 18.0 was officially launched last December, they really stopped caring about version 17 and the ones prior to it. No other update has come out for 17 since then. They put all their development and resources onto the latest version. Their new plan of everybody being on a subscription where you pay annually, that includes free updates to all the latest versions. Their vision is really to just have one version of ACT. They don't want people on all sorts of different versions, legacy systems that they have to support. They just want the latest update of ACT out there. And then if anybody has any type of ACT support questions, they can just say, are you on the latest version? And make sure that you have all the latest updates. It's kind of bittersweet. There's things I agree and disagree with about that, but we're not going to talk about that now. For those of you that are on a subscription plan, then you're free to update at any time. And you can talk to me if you have any questions about your license keys and things like that. Ernie, if you'd like to type into the chat what you might have been asking me by pasting in this email here, I'd be interested to address that. I'm not sure what that was about. But otherwise, I think I'd like to wrap up for now, and I will open the floor for questions. If there's anything I failed to cover that anybody else wants to go over, let me know. No problem, Ernie. That's fine. It did not bother me. Well, again, I know we went on to 45 minutes today. I try to keep these a little bit more brief than that. If you take anything away from it, make sure your backups are running. Do yourself a huge favor and, do this right after you get off the call. Have an ACT backup saved on your computer, and then use that ACT scheduler tool to make sure your backups are going. And you will be doing dances around the room of happiness in the future if you ever need them. That being said, I hope everybody is relaxed and refreshed from their weekend and goes on to have a great week. Thank you. Goodbye.